everyone. I'm Sumita, the founder of afineparent.com and your host here at the Positive Parenting Conference. This is the Managing Our Emotions Masterclass, and our expert guide today is Casey Oroti. Welcome, Casey.
Hi, Sumita. Thank you for having me.
Casey is a positive discipline trainer and a parent coach. She hosts the popular podcast Joyful Courage. Casey has worked with countless families over 20 years to broaden perspectives on parenthood, behavior, and relationships between parents and children. Our inspiration for this masterclass is her lovely book, Joyful Courage: Calming the Drama and Taking Control of Your Parenting Journey. I am so glad that you're joining us, Casey. Ready to get started?
I am. I'm thrilled to be here.
All right, let's get this show started. So, in your book, you have this lovely concept that is fairly easy to understand and very, very easy to relate called the emotional freight train. Why don't we start with that? Talk to us a little about what the emotional freight train is, and let's take it from there.
Well, the emotional freight train came with my son when he's 14 now, but probably 8 or 10 years ago, he was like a typical boy or a typical young kid who would lose his mind when things didn't go his way or he didn't get what he wanted, or, you know, when things happened that he didn't like, he would lose it, and he would lose it. He would break his own toys. He would just lay on the floor, kicking and screaming, saying really, nasty things to everyone around him, whoever was around him. And so I kept trying to come back to helping him understand what was happening for him in those moments. And so always looking for a metaphor, always looking for something that would help him understand, and be more aware of his experience as he was having it. And so that's where the emotional freight train would show up, and I would talk about it with him as, when you start to feel, we talked about how does it feel in your body right before you get mad, and that's the train pulling in the station. And how sometimes we get so mad and we do all these things, and then we have to clean up later. We have to make things right with people that we were hurtful to, because the train kind of takes us and the train's in charge. We're no longer in charge. We're just holding on to this train. And so, we would talk to each other like that. And so I would say, does it feel like the train's coming into the station? Or he'd say, Mom, I think the train's shown up. To me, if I started losing my emotions, and that's where it originated, excuse me. And then it started to become such an easy metaphor to use with parents, just to talk about that experience of when we just have had enough, and it feels like we've used all of our tools and they're still not doing what we want them to be doing or what we think we want them to be doing, and we lose it. And Dan Siegel talks about brain in the palm of the hand. So this is, the emotional freight train has shown up and we're on it. So
Right.
that's where it came from.
I love that. I love that. And it's like you said, it's so easy to once you get the hang of it, it's so easy to start thinking of that. It's like ever since I read this book, it's there at the back of my mind. Ah, there's the train, right? It's
Yeah,
like
good.
and I love how you mentioned that when we are on the train, the logic is out the window, right? There is no room for logic on this train. When we are on this train, we are completely run by emotions, and then at the end of it, when we reach the whatever, the train journey is done,
Yeah.
there is this whole lot of devastation to clean up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And it's really, it coincides perfectly with the brain in the palm of the hand, the Dan Siegel work. I mean, really, we're on the train, we've lost our prefrontal cortex, and really all we have is that midbrain, that amygdala, that place where it's really driven by emotion and fight or flight or freeze. And so that's kind of why, we don't really have control or a perception of control. And you're going to ask me more questions, but it's really it gets messy, but it's also like, when you think about a train and it gets going and it gets going and it gets going, and if it's going pretty fast, it takes a lot to stop a freight train. And
Right.
so it's kind of the same experience that we have in parenting when we really are on a roll and we've really just hit that emotional threshold. I think that the idea that we can somehow just shift or stop is short-sighted. I mean, it takes a lot for us to come back to a place of calm, connection with self, connection with others. And I know for myself, I've had times where I'll go into my room and I sit on my bed and I'm like, I just got to breathe. I got to breathe this out. And it takes a lot of effort, not to mention the story that I still have in my head, which is screw them. I am mad and they need to know. So there's a lot going on to slow down that train.
Right. And the thing is, I'm sure everybody who's watching this at home is nodding, yes, 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 I've been
Yeah.
there, right? Because no parent is immune to this. So
No.
let's talk about that a little. Let's talk about how in every parent's life, because we parents are pretty good at guilt tripping ourselves and thinking, oh, I'm the only bad parent. I'm the only one who does this. Everybody else has got it together, but
Yeah.
nobody's immune to this, right?
Yeah. And I think that it's even, I think that probably it's always been that we show a good front. And now with, the ways that we're able to project ourselves in the world through social media, I think that it's gotten even this bigger platform for showing how everything's pulled together. We only, it's the highlight reel,
Mm.
right? And we don't put massive tantrums and meltdowns on the highlight reel typically. And I think that I know for me and in my work and my podcast, I really try to be super authentic and transparent about my own journey, especially as someone who works in the parenting field and coaches people around parenting. I think it's really important not to pretend that, well, if you just do, if you follow this book or this blog, then it'll turn out that you won't have any problems with your kids. And if you do have problems with your kids, there's something wrong with you. That is just such a load of crap. And it's so hurtful. And so it's always been my mission, even with the people that come on my podcast, some of which are pretty big names, some of them are in this summit. It's always important to me, and has been, to give them an opportunity to share, like, no, I am not always together and I have lost it on my kids, because I think it's really important for parents to know it's about doing better. It's not about being perfect. And it's, there's also huge gifts in making mistakes. There's huge gifts. Even when we ride the freight train, what we get to model after that is personal responsibility and making things right and making amends and fixing our mistakes. And if we want our kids to, have remorse and feel bad and do the things we want them to do when they've hurt someone or something, we have to show them what that looks like in a really authentic, organic way. And so I just, and I truly know with all of my heart that we're on a collective journey, that my challenges might be slightly different than your challenges or this person's challenge, but parenting is super hard.
I know. Oh gosh.
It's hard. And our kids, like, they're on their own journeys. I think a lot of it is our resistance to their journey. Our fear gets in the way. But they're on their own journey, and we just really get to hold the space for them, hold up the guardrails, so that they can really experience life in a way that grows them into, functioning, flourishing adults.
I love that. I love that. So you just mentioned that our fear kind of trips us up. I mean, we mean the best for them. So
Yeah.
let's go into that a little bit. So you talk about how there are many different triggers that kind of pull us into this emotional freight train, right? And
Mhm.
fear is one big one. So let's start by talking about some of the triggers or some of the, I don't know, ushers into the emotional freight train. So let's talk about those a little.
Well, I think it's really unique to each person. I think that we all have the things that send us over the edge. I think that you could probably trace them back to our experiences in childhood and the conditioning and modeling that we had, the places in our life where things went sideways or we weren't feeling heard or seen, or when things started to feel unsafe for us as children. I think that those manifest later on as triggers with our kids. And it's interesting too, because when you start to do the work of really digging into why is this so hard for me? Why is this thing the thing that's sending me over the edge? And if you can be really honest with yourself and open-minded, you can usually trace it back to something having to do with a time in our life where we didn't feel safe. And so, and parents are awesome future trippers. Like, we're really, really good at looking at a behavior that might be happening with our 4-year-old and imagining them in prison. Like, if I don't nip this in the butt, she's going to be a con artist. He's going to end up in jail. We just can spin out, and we have this feeling of urgency, which, I have a daughter who her birthday was, as of this taping, was yesterday, and she's 17.
Wow.
Or 2 days ago. 2 days ago was her birthday. And so I get the feeling of urgency now. But when our kids are little, like, you have time. And even now I recognize my 17-year-old story is a snapshot of right now. I mean, we can all look back to being 17 and whatever we may or may not have been doing or thinking or deciding about the world. And while there might be some threads that we still carry with us, I'm now 46. And I look back at 17 and I'm like, oh, geez, I didn't know anything. And I made tons of mistakes, along the way through college, through my 20s, and I'm okay, So I think it's really important to lift kind of up and out of the things that are triggering us when we're having those moments where we're kind of noticing. And I think and we're going to talk about this, but there's some practices we can do to get ahead of the trigger. And even there's practices we can do once we are willing to notice, like, oh, I'm here now. What can I do? Right. But it's a choice. It's, we get to be the grown-ups and we get to choose to create something different.
Right. So we're going to come back to the practices in a bit, but I want to stay with our triggers for a little longer. So you were talking about the things we did as 17-year-olds, right? And when we look back now, so there's two ways this plays out for me. It's like on when I want to calm myself down, I can say, oh, the dumb shit that I did when I was 17 years old, and I turned out okay. So
yeah.
First way to look at it is, oh, the dumb shit I did when I was 17, I got lucky. What if she doesn't? So it's just two ways of looking at the same story, and the choices we make determine whether we hop on that train or whether we choose to not hop on the train, right? So that's
right. And not hopping on the train doesn't mean we do nothing, right? Like, we can be confronted by a teenager who's making scary choices. Maybe they're sneaking out or they're experimenting with drugs. And we can either get on the train, totally freak out, lay down the law, put all the punishment things in place, completely fear-based, right? Completely like, I've got to control this kid. They're ruining their life. Or we can come at it from a place of curiosity and inquiry and like, tell me what's going on for you. Tell me, tell me about your decision to sneak out, and I think it's for parents that are listening right now, if you're not a parent who's curious with their kids, it's going to require you to be curious when things are kind of low stake. Because if you're someone who flies off the handle and all of a sudden you shift into, tell me about why you snuck out last night, that's going to feel like a trap, because they know that you're ready to punish them. And this whole new thing is clearly a trap. So, I just want to give that caveat, but, there's other ways to come at, to be in relationship with our kids that allows space for them, especially in the teen years, to individuate, to do some risk taking, which is what they do, and not push them further away by getting on the train, throwing down a bunch of punishments, and just coming from a place of not taking the time to understand who they are, where they're at in their life, and being an ally, right? Being an ally and a guide versus a judge, jury, and executioner, as Jane Nelson likes to say.
And that goes back to what we were saying earlier, right? Because once you hop on the train, it doesn't matter how much you're committed to positive parenting or how much before hopping on the train you could have all the best intention, but once you hop on the train, that's probably out the window. You are still going to go back to the default mode of yelling, punishment,
Yeah.
and all that. So we are going to come back and talk about how to keep from getting on the train in the first place, or if we are in the train, how to find ways to hop off. So we'll come back to that in a bit, but I just wanted to put it out there that it happens, right? I mean, once you're
Yeah.
on the train, what happens is generally not something that you can easily control.
Yeah.
All right, so we looked at one of the triggers, fear. There are a bunch more. So let's talk about anger. And anger is such a big thing for a lot of people, right? So let's talk about maybe give us a few examples of how easily anger can trip us up and put us on that train.
Well, and I think that anger is so interesting, because if we really start to look at anger and dig into why am I so mad right now, what's under the surface is typically fear. Like, I think fear is super foundational to all of our triggers. And anger sometimes shows up if we're feeling like, if under the surface we feel embarrassed by our kids' behavior, if we're feeling disgusted by our kids' behavior, if it's something where, like, if we have kids that are siblings, when one child hurts another. I know I was a awful oldest child. I was so mean to my siblings. And when, I know it's very sad, I've apologized. We're all very good friends now. But when I see my kids being hurtful to each other, I have a really hard time with it because of that. And because I know of the pain that I feel now around how I treated my siblings, so there's that. But I think that, there's so many things that can make us feel angry. I think a really common one is just simply on our end, and it always comes up when we do classes with parents and we brainstorm the challenges. Well, they just won't listen. They won't listen. They ignore me. That's so huge for parents. And it's so interesting to me, and I fall into this trap too. That saying, like, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Like, okay, parents, myself included, like,
definition, pretty much all parents are insane, right?
yeah, like, change it up. They won't listen. I say the same thing over and over and over again. And it's like, well, try something different. So that frustration. And I think that, and feelings of lack of control, I think too fit underneath this anger umbrella, because it is painful to realize that ultimately we don't have control of our children. Like, especially as they start, I mean, this becomes ever more clear. I mean, some people recognize this early on when they have really highly spirited kids and the strong-willed kids. It's, they get a good dose of that early on. Like, holy cow, I got to figure this out. For me, it really came as in middle and high school with my child. And I realized, oh my gosh, she could walk out the door. I mean, I could tackle her, but I'm not going to do that. Or trying to, get them to go somewhere, and recognizing the whole strong arm approach isn't, first of all, I'm not going to do that. But also, like, wow, they are their own people. And that can show up as fear. And I think fear is uncomfortable to feel. What feels powerful is anger. So I'm going to get bigger and more intimidating. I'm going to get louder, because ultimately I want you to do what I want you to do. Right. And so I think that anger, and also it's a learned behavior. I know for me, my conditioning has left me when things feel like they're spiraling. in my experience, they're spiraling. My whole system seems to spiral until I have to shut it down, right? And so, and also when plans, and it's funny because I present as this really easygoing person. I am not that easygoing. And if I have a plan, even if I haven't even spoken it out loud, and somehow the plan changes, it's hard for me to be easygoing about it. And typically what shows up is resentment and anger because I'm like, I had a plan. This was not it, people.
And all of that sucks us right into this train before we even realize it, right?
Yeah.
So, one of the things that you talk about is the first step to stay away from the emotional train is to increase our awareness, to be even to be conscious that this is happening, that a train is pulling in. You
Yeah.
talked about this in the context of you teaching your son when he was little, but it's something that we can do for ourselves too, right? No matter in the business, whatever business is going on in our lives, we can still grow if we can learn to recognize that the train is coming in the station. It's easier for us to stay off it. So let's talk about that a little bit. You talk about the cues that our body provides, and using them to kind of recognize, to realize that the train is approaching. So let's talk about that a little.
Yeah, I would love to. I think that as human beings, we spend a lot of our time up here in our head, in our thoughts, and not we don't necessarily spend a lot of time paying attention to our body. And our body is talking to us all the time, right? All the time. And in this context, this emotional freight train context, it's starting to pay attention to how it feels right before we've lost it. Like, what does it feel like to start to feel any kind of disapproval towards our kids? Or how does it feel when and for me, my experience is, I feel heat in my legs, my hands kind of clench, my shoulders come in, I can feel like that tension and that tightness in my body. And the way that I've learned to pay attention to that is I have, and this is something that I support my clients with and I talk about on the podcast. But I think, if we're going to decide to be different, right, when our kids are having a hard time, we have to practice being different when our kids are not having a hard time. Like Olympic athletes don't just show up to the Olympics like, oh, I'm going to do better this time, right? They practice a lot. And so one of the tools that I use is my phone, right? I set little reminders throughout the day that allow me to just do a quick check-in on my body and just note. And I might be at my computer, I might be at the grocery store, I might not even be anywhere near my kids, but it's just an opportunity to recognize, oh, what's alive right now for me? Like, am I irritated that the person in front of me has so many groceries? Okay, well, is that going to change my experience? No, I might as well just let that go, right? Or am I feeling, is there worry in my belly because of, whatever I might be doing, what's happening in my body? And then coming to a place of a more neutral physical experience. So if I do find tension, it's releasing the tension, it's pulling back my shoulders, it's maybe spreading my feet out a little bit so I have a feeling of stability and confidence in my stance. And it's really just, like I said, coming to this place of a more neutral experience, because when we can start with the body, the mind will follow. That's something that I've learned from a mentor of mine, Krista Petty Raymer. She says, when the body leads, the mind learns. And so for me, and just like that story I said about sitting on the bed, like, okay, I have to breathe, but I'm mad at everyone and they need to know, like, it's really hard to talk myself out of being upset. But if I just simply start with the body, maybe taking some deep breaths to slow my heart rate, if I can shift up my body experience, then it opens up the mind experience to a place where I'm more willing to um, get it together, get off the train, soften.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned that not everybody is aware of that body thing, because I was like that. It's like even now, it's like you said that when you are anxious, when you're worried, when you can feel the train come in and you can say this, and this happens. I somehow am not there yet. It's like, so I like that you mentioned that not everybody can easily recognize this, but if you can, that's great. And if you can't, then start on other areas, like when you're calmer to recognize and then get there. So now slowly I'm starting to recognize that I hold my tension in my shoulder and like, like tiny clues, but not as aware as many others are probably. So
Yeah.
I like that you mentioned that an easier thing is probably to just set a timer and to just do a check-in. And because that's what I had to do, because I started getting this tension headaches and I didn't even realize it was a tension headache until I'm like, I've slept well, everything's fine, why do I have a headache? So I thought it was my eyes. I got my eyes checked, everything was fine. And then I realized I was holding the tear and it was a very stressful period. So body checks periodically are a great way to get started.
Yeah, definitely. And I would also say, this isn't like, I just want to be really clear. It's not like, oh, and you practice and then you feel it coming and you never get on the train. That is not, spoiler alert. There's no, I mean, unless you become a monk and you live in a cave,
Right.
you
With
are
no
going to visit, yeah, you're going to visit the train. But I think that it's just, and I think too, just going back to that conversation around control, a word that's really been useful for me lately to just sink into and be okay with is uncertainty. Because the parenting journey, like, it is uncertain. Just like you said, we can look at situations multiple ways. We can absolutely be in the mindset of, I was crazy and I am fine. Or I was crazy, I was lucky, they're going, to rehab or dead in a ditch or whatever. And there's so many other possibilities between those two. And we just get to be in trust and uncertainty because we
right,
can't
right.
know the future. We can't know the future. So, but I think the more we can practice just how we are showing up and what our experience is and what we're modeling, I think we are doing everything we can to influence a future um, of for our kids to be, like I said, functioning and contributing members of society, because they got to see a real life human in the work of being a human.
Right. I love that. So, on that note, we are going to stop this segment of the masterclass. So, everyone, hopefully, we've given you an idea of using the emotional freight train as a way of recognizing it when you're going to lose it, right? So, and we talked about the body mind connection. We are going to come back and dive into this, and hopefully, if this is going to help you identify your triggers too. So, in the next segment, we are going to dive deep into a practice that Casey has come up with for helping us not get on the train or eventually hop off the train, stay off the train. We're going to look at all that in the next segment. This is the first segment of the Managing Our Emotions Masterclass, inspired by the book Joyful Courage, with our expert guide, Casey O'Rourke, who is the author of the book. So you don't want to miss that next segment. Come back and join us. We're going to take a short break and we'll start that.